Man, I miss youth ministry. Like that's what I did for 10 years, you know. I'm still processing varsity chili through my colon like as we speak. Man, I miss that. But I wouldn't change the opportunity to be up here with you guys. And I hope you see here how deeply we value your children. Those of you that allow us to be stewards of your children during these hours each Sunday. And it's important for us because today we're celebrating that promotion time of as they change grades in their schools where they go to during the week. You know, we want to see that reflected here because we want to see them grow, not just in age and in grade. We want to see them grow in their faith. And so we're really grateful for what's happening in our student ministry as well as our children's ministry. So much so that's why we're spending this month in this series to talk about the home and to talk about the family. That's what this whole series, White Picket Fences, is about. And we're glad that you're here. It's our second week. So if you weren't with us last week, you're not too far behind. We have CDs out in the lobby if you need to check that out, or you can go online to our website and review those. But we're spending this whole month talking about the home and the family, and we're using the book of Nehemiah, which is the 16th book in the Old Testament, the first part of the Bible. We're using that story as our backdrop. Because Nehemiah was thrown into a situation that seemed very hopeless, that seemed overwhelming. There was absolute chaos and ruin and rubble. And we live in a world that celebrates the ideal. We live in a society, a culture, an American culture that talks about the American dream. And what's the American dream? You have your car and your job and your house and your 2.5 kids and your dog and your cat, and you put a white picket fence around it. And if you've got that, you've got it. Nothing can go wrong except when it does, right? Because it doesn't take very long to live in this world to know that things can change in a moment. And that ideal comes crashing down. And that's what we're discussing this whole series. What happens when the ideal, the white picket fence around our lives, comes crashing down? And that's the situation Nehemiah was in. And that's the situation many of us are in. Many of you are today, this very moment. You're living in a crisis. You're living in some trauma that's happening in your home, in your life. Maybe it's work related. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's a relationship dying and falling apart. Wherever you are, know that God loves the brokenhearted. And we're talking about the series that is a painful one to work through, but it shows again and again and again, and we're going to see it today, that God moves in to those moments, those times of ruin, that he is the most active there, and he's active there on your behalf. But sometimes, for us to get there and to grasp that and to fully understand in our lives, we've got to put in some time and some effort. We've got to put in the energy. And Nehemiah today, as we're going to see in a few minutes, was called to do that. Was called to wait a little bit and then to put forth effort. And that's a hard thing for me to get. Even though I tried really hard to be all about things sometimes, it does not typically work that way. Like, for example, in 1984, everybody was kung fu fighting. Everybody. Because in 1984, the Ralph Macchio classic Karate Kid came out into the theaters, and it swept through the movies. If you've been with me, since I got here earlier this year, you know I love the Karate Kid because this is the second time I've mentioned it in the sermon, and it won't be the last time. The Karate Kid was so foundational, so formational for me. And when that movie came out, you met Daniel-san, who was fighting up against the bullies of the Cobra Kai Dojo, which is the name of my fantasy baseball team because I'm a Karate Kid nerd. And he needed to learn karate, so into his life comes Mr. Miyagi. And Daniel's ready to be his student. He's ready to learn. And Mr. Miyagi says, you come over, we'll train. Daniel's like, yes, I'm finally going to learn some karate. And what does Mr. Miyagi do? He hands him a paintbrush. And he says, Daniel-san, paint the fence. And he's over there moaning and groaning like teenagers do, and he's painting the fence. And Mr. Miyagi comes back and he goes, look, Mr. Miyagi, it's done. He goes, no, Daniel-san, whole fence. And it's this huge fence, and he had to paint the whole thing. And then at the end of the day, Daniel's all mad because he didn't learn any karate. And then Mr. Miyagi shows him with that time, that energy, and that effort comes that muscle memory. And he goes, and he tries to punch him, and the painting the fence wasn't painting the fence. It blew my 8-year-old mind. He was learning karate by painting the fence. That's why I didn't know karate, because I never painted a fence. And because I never took karate. So when I was 8, I started to beg my mom, I've got to be in karate. Everybody who's anybody is going to karate. And if you grew up in the greater Washington, D.C. area like I did, there was a commercial that came on for Jewelry self-defense. And it was by Master Jewelry, and there was this local like cheese ball commercial, but it came on and it was like images of guys breaking bricks and kicking people in the face. And when you're 8 and you're watching Karate Kid 20 times, you're like, yes, I want that. And then the song came on, it went, when you take Jewelry self-defense, then you too can say, nobody bother me, nobody bother me, call USA 1000 and you'll be right to fight. And then at the end, I guess it was Master Jewelry's kids. There's a little Korean boy and a little Korean girl, and the little Korean girl went, nobody bother me, and the little Korean boy went, nobody bother me either, and he winked. It was awesome. So much so that I still remember it. 30 years later, I remember it. I don't remember what I had for breakfast this morning, but I remember that jingle. And when that was on 20 times a day, and Karate Kid was constantly in my Betamax VCR, all I wanted to do was karate. And so my mom took me to the Dale City Recreation Center, which was the mecca for karate in my town. And we walked in, I'm like, yes, it's coming together. I'm going to fight. I'm going to punch bullies. I'm ready to fight Master Jewelry. This is on. She's going to sign me up. She's going to get my gi. She's going to get my black belt because I'm probably going to be that far advanced from watching Karate Kid 2,000 times. And my mom walks down the hall. I'm like, she ain't holding the gi. She doesn't have my black belt. And she goes, I had to put you on the waiting list. The waiting list. I'm here today, 30 years later. I still haven't got my call off the waiting list. I don't think there is a waiting list at the Dale City Recreation Center. If you can pay for karate, they're going to put you in karate. But I didn't know when I was 8 that we probably couldn't afford it. And if you tell my mom what I'm about to say to you, with my limited karate knowledge, I will throat punch you, people. I will throat punch you. But the real reason my mom probably didn't sign me up is I wouldn't have stuck with it. I don't wait well. I've never waited well. I've never wanted to put in time and energy and effort. Karate, dieting, whatever. I'm not going to do it. That was something, and my mom got that. My mom understood me well enough to go, he's probably not going to stick with it. And she's probably right. But if you tell her that, it's on, people. It's on. A few years ago, true story, a few years ago, I told my mom that story. She conveniently did not remember that. But it clearly has scarred me. Thousands of dollars have been spent in counseling fees to me work through the fact my mom wouldn't sign me up for karate. And I told my mom and my sister that just a few weeks after that, a letter comes to my office, to like my job. And it was addressed to me on that side. I opened on the inside, and at the top it said, Jewelry self-defense. And it was like a letterhead. And it said, Mr. Reynolds, you have been admitted into our next class. We're taking you off the wait list. And my sister made that up. She was like copying and pasting stuff at work. And she said when she was writing it, she was dying laughing. And somebody walked by her desk. My sister lives in Huntsville, Alabama. Somebody walked by her desk and said, what are you laughing about? She's like, I'm sending my brother. And she told him the story. And she goes, I'm sending it from Jewelry. And he looked at her and he goes, when you take Jewelry. Because if you're from D.C., you know that song. And I wanted that, but I wouldn't have put in the effort. I would have quit after like 2 lessons. I'm like, they make you sweat in there. People punch you. Where's my Atari and cheese puffs? We met Nehemiah last week, and Nehemiah was put into a pretty grave situation. News came to him when he was living in Persia that the walls of Jerusalem were still torn down, and that was catastrophic. The ideal for these people, the Jewish people, which Nehemiah was a part of, was destroyed. It was in ruin, and no one was rising to the task, and it hurt Nehemiah. It grieved him deeply. His town, his people, his capital city was in ruins. And Nehemiah was convicted by this. Nehemiah was passionately mourning for his people. Nehemiah had a desire to see them come up. And that's one thing, to be convicted about it, to have passion about it, to have a desire to do it. But Nehemiah has a book of the Bible named after him because he's about to do something more than just feel bad about it. He's about to act. He's about to respond. He has a book of the Bible named after him because he responded to that. Many of us are in a crisis in our life, in our homes, in our marriages, in our families, in our jobs, whatever it may be. You fill in the blank there. You may be at that point, and it's one thing to feel bad about that. And that's good. But we need to act. We need to move. That's what God called Nehemiah to. It's what God is calling you and I to as well. Nehemiah had both the conviction and the willingness to faithfully respond. Action, movement, response, faith are different than just being broken about this. Being convicted, having a passion to see something different. We need to have both, and Nehemiah did, and I think many of us here do as well. Even in dire circumstances, even when Nehemiah was told to wait, he waited with an expectation that God was up to something. And we're going to see that come alive in Nehemiah chapter 2. If you have your Bibles, you can turn there. We've got it in the worship guide this morning. We're going to put up on the screen. But in Nehemiah chapter 2, we start to see this all come together. And there's that reminder. We need to be reminded about the history here. Last week we learned that Nehemiah was in Susa. Susa was the capital of Persia. Persia was the empire that defeated the Babylonians, who defeated the Jewish people, the nation of Israel. Destroyed their lands and took them into captivity, took them into slavery. We talked last week about how King Cyrus and the Persians defeated the Babylonians and said to the Jewish people, you can go home if you want to. You can go back and start to rebuild your nation. So after 40 plus years in exile, they returned home. But not all of them. Some of them stayed in Persia, like Nehemiah. And he was cupbearer to the king. He was in the royal court. He was a servant to the king who had a pretty important job. He tasted the food to make sure that the king wasn't being poisoned and tried to be assassinated. 94 years since Israel was defeated and destroyed and their people taken into slavery, to the point that Nehemiah gets some news that the people were still hurting, that Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, their walls around it were still destroyed. And that's a pretty dire circumstance because there was no safety there, was no security there. And he gets this news from some family members and it grieves him deeply. Do you remember it said he sat down and he mourned and wept 4 days. This was a big deal to him and to his people. So let's see, when he gets all that news, what's gonna happen? What's Nehemiah gonna do when he's off in this country? Let's pick it up, the story in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1. It says this: in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when the wine was before him, I took up the wine and I gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. So verse 1 says, in the month of Nisan. Now if you aren't up on your Persian calendar, that's okay. It's what you pay me for. Because if you notice last week in chapter 1, in the very first verse of the book, it says, now it happened in the month of Chislev. So when this story starts, it's the month of Chislev. When we pick up today, it's in the month of Nisan. That's a 4-month difference. Nehemiah got some painful news, some heartbreaking news that caused him to mourn and weep for many days. But here we are 4 months later, and he's in the same place he was when the book started. Nehemiah was waiting. And that's a painful place to be. Many of you have been waiting in the crisis in your life for longer than 4 months. Many of them going on for 4 years, 40 years, 400 years it may feel like. That this pain has been going on, this crisis in your life. You've been watching your marriage disintegrate or your children continue to rebel. You've been in a job that you hate, and that job probably hates you, and you're stuck there waiting. It's a painful place to be, but know this, that oftentimes we're called to wait. Obedience is a slow process. You may want the change, you may desire the change, you may be convicted of the change, but God is building something in you, just like he was in Nehemiah. Nehemiah wanted to move on behalf of his people, but God kept him where he was for 4 months. from getting this news. 4 months, but it's also been 94 years since anything has happened in Jerusalem. This has been a long process, almost 100 years of waiting. Obedience can be slow sometimes. And we've got to learn to be okay with that, because it's not just God going, I'm going to make you wait just to make you wait. It's God saying, I'm going to make you wait because I'm building something in you. I'm making you stronger. You may not feel it today, friends, but he is at work in your life because God is active in the ruins. He's moving there. He's building in Nehemiah. He's building in you. That's not the only thing about Nehemiah in the story. There's some other things, and we're going to see those here in just a second. Let's read, start back up in verse 2. It says this, and the king said to me, why is your face sad, seeing that you aren't sick? This is nothing but sadness of the heart. Then I was very much afraid, and I said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire? And then the king said to me, what are you requesting? So I prayed to the God of heaven. Nehemiah wasn't just waiting. Nehemiah was sad. Did you notice that? The king looked at him and said, why are you sad? Now in verse 1, it said, I had not been sad in the presence of the king. For 4 months, with this news heavy on his heart, Nehemiah went to work every single day because obedience is slow, right? But all of a sudden one day, he's sad in the presence of the king, and the king sees it, and he asks him, what's going on? Had nothing to do with the king, had nothing to do with Nehemiah. It was God moving on behalf of his people. God initiated what was about to happen. God's going to initiate the change in your life that you need. It's going to come in a time that he is working towards, he is building towards. It's our opportunity to respond to that, and we're going to see Nehemiah do that in a minute. He was sad. You're sad. It's painful, some of the places that you're in. I can't even imagine some of what you're going through. Nehemiah gets it better than I do because he was hurting and sad, and God starts to move and change and build into his life. But he wasn't just sad. It says he was afraid. The king looked at him and said, why is your face sad? And it says he was very much afraid. He was filled with fear. Fear is very much at play when God is about to do something big in your life. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. If you visit other churches, they're like, you should never have fear. I'm like, well, hold on, man. Nehemiah's got a book of the Bible named after him, and he had fear. It's okay to feel fear of what you're about to go through. He was scared because the king, the most powerful man on the planet at that moment, was looking at him going, what's wrong? And if I don't like what's wrong with you, I'm going to kill you. Because he could do that because he's a king. But more importantly, Nehemiah was afraid because God was up to something. He was about to have to act in faith on what God was building in him. You may be feeling that too. God's calling you to work on some of these issues that are bringing you pain. And he's going to be with you, but it's going to mean you taking a step of faith, me taking a step of faith. And that's scary sometimes. Nehemiah was waiting. Nehemiah was sad. Nehemiah was afraid. These are natural things that happen when our lives are in flux. When you're going through the crisis that many of you are going through right now, you're feeling that pain that comes with waiting and sadness and fear. That's natural. So what do we do? What does Nehemiah do? We're trying to see his pattern and maybe apply it to our own lives. Well, he does something that is very unnatural. Though he was waiting, though he was sad, though he was filled with fear, Nehemiah, at the end of this, prayed. Did you notice that? The king said, what are you requesting? And it says, and so I prayed to God. Nehemiah prayed. He paused and then he prayed. Did you notice that? He paused and he prayed. And you're like, hold on, Joel, didn't you mention that last week? Yes, thank you for listening. I did. In chapter 1, when all this comes down, Nehemiah stops and he prays. And let me give you a sneak peek to next week. Guess what he does in chapter 3 and 4? He pauses and he prays. Do you think that may be a pattern that he did that brought some success, that he has a book of the Bible named after him? And perhaps it can be for you and me as well. That when crisis and turmoil and trial and pain come, maybe the thing that we're lacking is that willingness to stop for a moment and to say, God, I can't handle this. This hurts. I can only do it by connecting to you. That's what Nehemiah does. He pauses and he prays because that's where life changes. It's in those moments of those pauses. You can be as mad as you want. You can be as angry as you want. You can make as many Facebook rants as you want to. Guess what? It's probably not going to change the circumstances that you're in. Let's try maybe perhaps praying, because in a moment, life can change. It can all come crashing down. Your kids one day is going to walk in drunk. They're going to walk in, Mom, Dad, I'm pregnant. And you're not going to have that moment to light the incense and start chanting in Gregorian chants and reciting Latin prayers. Your kid's going to walk in drunk and you're not going to have the chance. Hold on, let me meditate here. Theos, I'm going to kill someone. We're not going to have that moment. You have that moment to pause and to say, God, help. And that's a pretty appropriate prayer sometimes. God, I need you. Because any moment, a doctor could look at you and say it's cancer. Any moment you could go to your OBGYN with your spouse and they can't find the heartbeat. Any moment your boss can call you in and say, your job is eliminated, we don't need you here anymore. Any moment life can change. The ideal will come crashing down. And the pain may come and the hurt may come because life is hard. It's difficult sometimes. Nehemiah acts in the midst of this, and so can you and I. And he acts in an extraordinary way. He prays. He stops and he prays. That prayer will lead you to act, not in your time, not in your energy, but in God's will and in God's strength. Nehemiah begins to act. He'd been waiting, yes. He had been sad and hurting, yes. He had been in pain, yes. Afraid, yes, but he does something that all of us need to learn from. He stopped and he connected to God. He starts to act now, and it changes everything, not just for him, but for his whole people, for their city, for their land, for their religion. It changes everything, and it all flows out of his prayers. This was his secret sauce, and it can be for you and me as well. To pause and to pray. Because you only have that moment. And it can all change. So we learn from Nehemiah today to pause, to pray, and to act. Now let's look at how he acted. Let's look at how he acted, because I told you we're going to talk about praying next week too, and the week after, and the week after that. So hey, you don't have to come back now. I guess I've given you the whole series. The king looks at Nehemiah and says, why the long face? And Nehemiah prays and then responds. And he acts out in three ways that I want to show you, all right? Real quick, let's do this. Go down to verse 5. Chapter 2, verse 5, it says this. And I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servants have found favor in your sight, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I may rebuild it. And the king said to me with the queen sitting beside him, how long will you be gone? And when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me when I had given him a time. And I said to the king, if it pleases the king, let letters be given to me to the governors of the province beyond the river, that they may let me pass through until I come to Judah. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress of the temple and the walls of the city, and for the house that I shall occupy. And the king granted me what I asked, for the good hand of my God was upon me. Nehemiah starts to act. Out of his pausing, out of his praying comes action. And the first way he shows it is by asking. You see what he asked for here? Just in those couple of verses, he asked for time off, paid time off. He's like, yeah, I'm not going to do my job, and I want to be paid for it. But he doesn't just stop there. He says, and write me a letter, king, to all of the kings beyond the river, all the nations that I have to cross through to get to my nation that I'm going to go to and work while you're paying me, and tell them to let me pass, because your name is powerful and people are afraid of that. But that's not all he asked for. Then he says, and give me all the timber to do all the building. How bold is he? This is changing not just how we go about our families. Many of us are going to go into our bosses tomorrow and be completely different. Pay me to not work. And a raise. And a PlayStation 6. And a foot massage. And drive me around to Wendy's. I don't know what you're going to ask for, but I'm going to ask for those things because they're awesome. Nehemiah walks into the king and says, pay for it all and pay me so I can go away to a country that doesn't even belong to you, to do something for people that aren't even your people. And what does the king do? The king grants it. Did you see that? You can't make this stuff up. He's like, okay, go. And here's letters, and here's wood. How incredible is that? It's because God wants to respond to your prayers. He wants to respond to the needs in your life, in your family. God is always for his people, always for his people. And he's prepared the king, he's prepared Nehemiah, and guess what? He's preparing you. He wants to work on behalf of your home and your family and your people. And we miss this so often because our prayers are vague. They're ambiguous. They're narrow. They're faithless. Nehemiah prays and says, God, help me here because these are your people. We are your children. Lead us. And God does. So maybe, just maybe, he wants to do the same for the needs in your life. God is for your family. He believes in your family. He was for the rebuilding of the walls of this city for this people, and he's for rebuilding the walls for you and your family, your home. Nehemiah was bold in how he asked, and God responded, because God wants to respond to your prayers. But he didn't just stop there. Nehemiah was inspecting. Another way he acted was how he inspected. Look down in verse 11. It says, so I went to Jerusalem, and I was there 3 days. And then I arose in the night, I and a few men with me, and I told no one what God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There was no animal with me but the one on which I rode. And I went out by night to the valley gate, to the dragon spring, and to the dung gate, and I inspected the walls of Jerusalem, that they were broken down, and the gates that had been destroyed by fire. Then I went on to the fountain gate and the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal that was under me. Then I went up in the night by the valley and inspected the wall, and I turned back and entered the valley gate and returned. And the officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, and I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and the rest who were there to do the work. Nehemiah starts to inspect. It says he was there for 3 days, and then he started going out at night, looking at the walls, inspecting. I didn't tell anybody what he was up to. He just starts going around and doing that. He starts to go around and see the wreckage, the breaches in the walls, how much wood he was going to need here, and how much wood he was going to need there, what foreman he was going to need, what workers he was going to need. We need to do the same in our own lives. Some of us are in the midst of wreckage, but we're so turned off to it that we don't even inspect it. We don't even understand fully what's going on. What part do I play? Where are my consequences? What have I done to bring this on? Who in my life can I connect with? Where do I go for support? We just get in the midst of the room and we're like, I can't do anything with it. I'm just going to sit here and pout. And I'll tell you about it on Facebook. God's calling us to act, to start inspecting those needs in our lives, to go around and start to do that. And some of the ways that we really need to do that is through prayer, through our own personal Bible reading, how we learn and study and grow, connecting with an accountability circle, people that we trust and love us, that can speak honestly to us, that we can run things by. We need to start building that before we start rebuilding the walls. And we do it because that's a pattern that Nehemiah set for us. There's a plan that's there, but we've got to take hold of it in our faithful response, in our actions, because God wants to build a plan with you. He's not just ready to respond to your prayers. He wants to build a plan with you, for your home, and for your people. We got to get this in our heads. The ideal is never going to happen. Really, more importantly, we don't want the ideal. I want the real, not just for me, but for you, because it's in the real that God is there and working and moving. It may hurt, and it may be difficult, and it may fill you with fear, but that's where God is. Let's go there. Let's enter some of that pain and start to work through some of the things that have happened to us, some of the wreckage that we've caused, and start to connect with God and say, how do I find this plan with you, God? How do we start to do this and respond? Friends, God is ready to build a plan with you for your home, for your lives. So Nehemiah was asking, Nehemiah was inspecting, but he was also starting to lead. Up until this point, Nehemiah hadn't said what he was doing. He told no one, it said. He was doing his inspections at night, so not many people saw him. And then he opens his mouth in verse 17, and look at what he says. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we're in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem that we may no longer suffer derision. And I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, let us rise up and build. Nehemiah starts to lead. He wasn't just asking, he wasn't just inspecting, he was leading. And he leads them in a pretty obvious way, doesn't he? It starts off, his first words out of his mouth to these people is, we're in trouble. And they're like, yeah, thanks for the update. You who've been in the king's temple in Persia, thanks for showing up and tell us we're in trouble. We don't need to be told the trouble we're in, do we? I pretty much know the pain that I've caused, the wreckage that I've created, the consequences that I've faced through bad decisions, through life just being hard sometimes. So have you. But we're waiting for somebody to lead us. These people were waiting for somebody to lead them. We get it. We get it. They're like, yeah, Joel, thanks for speaking up, but hey, I'm just here even though my kids don't want to be at church. That's the pain I'm in. Well, hey, maybe it's because we're not worshiping at home with our kids. We're not leading them in that way. And you're like, oh, no, that's not it for me, Joel. It's my finances. We are in ruins. Maybe it's because we've been buying too much crap on our credit cards. We're like, no, Joel, it's not that. It's not that. It's just, my family's just so entitled and so selfish. Maybe it's because all the time you spend is serving one another and getting what each other has to have, supposedly. There's no depth in my life, Joel. I'm not growing. You're not talking long enough. Well, I can talk a lot longer if you want me to. But perhaps it's not me you have to listen to only. Maybe it's time for you to start growing on your own, reading on your own, finding a Bible study, a small group to be a part of, being in accountability with someone, reading some devotionals, praying more perhaps. We don't need to be told the trouble we're in. Maybe it's time for us to start moving and leading our people, our homes, leading ourselves. We are the leaders that we need. And we see here that Nehemiah was the leader that they needed. What did they say when he told them this? It said, let us rise up and build. That's what they said. Why? Because they were waiting for someone to lead. 94 years they have been waiting for somebody to lead them. And Nehemiah shows up and he pauses and he prays and he acts. And how do they respond? Let's go. Let's do this. Your family is waiting on you to lead because you are the leader that they need. Your life is ready to be changed because God has been building you, your children, your spouses, your loved ones, the people that you're with. They're waiting for you to lead because you are the Nehemiah for your home. You are the Nehemiah for your life. We need to pause some. We need to pray some. And we need to start acting. Your family is waiting on you to lead them. And the response could be the same. They could look at you and say, yes, let us rise up and build. Because you've spent time inspecting. You've spent time asking God to do something on behalf of your family. And he's been building in you this moment, for your family, for this day. When I was 16 years old, almost 17, my parents said to me, look, you're going to church because that's what our family does. We know you don't enjoy it, but when you are 18, you can decide if you're going to go or not. And I was like, yes, I'll take that deal. Because who wants to get up and go to church on Sundays other than you suckers? Thanks. And so I was just riding out my contract. Once I hit 18, so long, church, hello, sleeping in. My parents, in one kind of last-ditch effort, we moved from a church that was dying, maybe already dead, and we moved to this church that was very different than any church I had ever gone to. They listened when the pastor spoke. They took notes. Who does that? And they sang and they talked about what God was doing in life, and people were responding and lives were being changed. People were being saved. It was an incredible place to be. And even as much as I didn't want to be there, I kind of was watching what these people were doing, but still kind of looking at the clock. And all I had to do was go to church. We had Sunday school. I didn't have to go to Sunday school. So I went to the early service so I could get on out of there and have the most amount of my day left. And one day at church, almost at the end of my junior year in high school, I was just about to turn 17. They said, hey, the youth are about to go on the retreat, kind of like the video we just saw a moment ago. And my mom's sitting next to me, and my mom's like, hey, and I was like, So when church was over, I went on home. She went to Sunny Hill. She comes back later that day. And some of you got to meet Pat Reynolds last week, and your life is better because of it. She's the Reynolds that you need to know. You don't even know anybody in my family but my mom, because she's amazing. And she came home that day, and she said, hey, what do you think about that retreat? I was like, whatever. She's like, do you think you'd want to go? I was like, no, who'd want to do that? These people are weird and crazy. I'm not going to spend a weekend with them. She's like, well, I signed you up, so you're going. Oh, I was like, what? What are you doing, crazy woman? The next Friday comes to go to the retreat. My dad had to literally drag me there and kind of kick me out of the car. He's like, take him, just go away with him. When my dad said the vans pulled out on Friday, he was like, I didn't know what they were going to get into, what you were going to do to them. And he said, and then all of a sudden, Sunday you came back and you were smiling and you were talking to people. That one little retreat started to put me on a course that changed my life. 4 months later, I surrendered to the gospel and I was saved and baptized. A month after that, 5 months after this retreat that my parents made me go on, I felt that God was calling me, and I didn't even get it yet, to be a pastor. I didn't even know what that meant. I didn't know if you got paid for it or not, but I was like, that's what I'm supposed to do. Within 5 months, my life changed radically. I would not be standing here today, this moment, breathing and uttering these words, if my mom and dad hadn't faithfully led me like Nehemiah and said, we are going to do this for him to see if maybe some change could come in his life. Because I was rebellious. I was turned off. I was making poor choices. And I was wandering further and further away from a faith that mattered to them. And they wanted it to matter to me. So in faith, in action, in prayer, they said, go, we're going to send you on it. And it changed my life. My mom and dad were Nehemiahs to me. Many of you are sitting here today because there's been Nehemiahs in your life that have prayed for you, poured into you, drug you here today because they want to see your life change. Many of you have been changed, and it's time for you to become a Nehemiah in someone's life because you're exactly who they need. Your home is exactly who you need to be for them. You are exactly the Nehemiah that God is calling you to. That's something worth working towards. That's something worth continuing to listen towards. That's something worth doing in our life. Will you pray with me? Father, I thank you. God, I praise you for the heritage in my life. That I'm here today praying on this stage in this moment because of a sacrifice my parents made. Back in 1993, they invested in me. Thank you that they believed in me. Thank you that they were Nehemiahs to me. God, thank you that there's so many people here that are here because someone poured into their life, a parent, a loved one, a friend, a mentor. And thank you, God, that you're calling people to do just that. Because we are surrounded by people who are hurting. They're in pain. They're in crisis. The walls have come tumbling down around their lives, God. They're vulnerable. They're scared. They're sad. They're brokenhearted. But we've heard today, God, that that's where you work best. That's your specialty. You're ready to move on our behalf. You want to be near the brokenhearted. And so, God, be near those today who are hurting, who are in crisis. And God, be near those today who are strong and ready to lead and serve their loved ones, their family members, their friends, the people around them. God, you're doing great work in our midst. And it's because you love us deeply and you want to connect with us daily, moment by moment. So God, for those of us that are just barely holding on, give us strength for one more day. Meet us where we are. And God, for those of us that have strength, let us reach out a hand to those in need and be Nehemiahs to one another. And then Nehemiahs in our homes and in our workplaces and in the world that we're about to go out into. God, thank you for that, and begin to change lives. Not in our time, God, but in your time, because that's exactly where each of us need to be. We're grateful that you're there. We're grateful that you're holding on to us for one more day. I lift up these people now in Jesus' name. Amen. And amen. Thank you so much for listening today. Thank you for coming back and being a part of this. I want to invite you back for our White Picket Fences week 3 next week. We're going to get into the 3rd and 4th chapters of the book of Nehemiah, and we're going to see the opposition that he begins to face. Because sometimes when we start to do something bold and big for God, we're going to face oppositions. People are going to come and fight against us. Maybe it's our circumstances, or maybe it's actual people that rise up against us. And this is what happens to Nehemiah. We're going to meet them next week, and we're going going to see what he does. Because everyone, Nehemiah included, you and I as well, are given two choices, to flee or to fight. And so we're going to talk about that next week, and I want to invite you back to be a part of that, to come and join us next Sunday right here. And to get ready for that, I'm going to give you some homework. I want you to read Nehemiah chapter 3 and 4. I know 2 chapters of the Bible, you got 7 days. I know I'm crazy, but I do it because I believe in you. And I think we can read those 2 chapters. So read Nehemiah 3 and 4 to prepare for next week. It's going to be good homework to get you deeper into this book, to see how we can fight the way that Nehemiah fought when opposition rises up. You got it? Got it. Good. You guys get out of here. Have a great Sunday. Love you. Bye.